Hi guys, it's so good to have you again in this session of our government tutorials. And in this session, we're going to be looking at political ideologies. And at the end of this session, you will be able to differentiate between the major political ideologies and also to contrast the various modes of production that we have. Now, I've listed out 6 political ideologies that are very common and would take time to understand each one of them in this lesson. The 6 of them herein include Communalism, Feudalism, Capitalism, Socialism, Fascism, and Communism. All of the isms. In this session, we are going to be looking at each one of them to have a good grasp of them. Now let's start with communalism. And there's just 2 words or 1 word that can explain communalism perfectly, and that is collectivity. And so when you think communalism, think collectivity. It is a political and an economic arrangement with emphasis on collectivity. And so the community, they agree that they should cooperate and come together to harness their resources for the good of everybody. There is no individualistic orientation. It is a collective practice. And when you look at Bangladesh and India, you'd find out that they have a lot of this measure in their economic system. Now we'll look at the features critically. Now, I already said it is a collective ownership. So no one actually owns property or the means of production. It is a collectively owned means of production in this economic system, and there is opportunity for community development. So everyone, all hands are on deck for the development of their community. It is not an individual race. Everyone is involved, and it seems like a self-government where public issues are discussed openly. And then decision making, everyone is carried along because you are involved, I am involved, I bring my resources, you bring yours for the good of everyone. And there is no room for exploitation in this economic system, no room at all. Everyone is purposeful for the good of everyone and not for self. And then you find out that there's a good relationship between the units of government, everyone around, because we are all working together for us. It's for us and not for me or for you. That's like the basic of this system. So when you think communalism, you think collectivity. Again, we'll be looking at feudalism. And when you think feudalism, the first thing that should come to mind is land ownership. In this system, it was very common in the medieval Europe, where the king or the queen, who owns all the land, gives out the land in manors or in serfs to the nobles for the military services that they render to him. Now these nobles themselves in turn give out the land to the vassals and other people who live on their land and render work and do services for them while living on the land. So the nobles themselves also offer protection to the people who live on their land. So basically it was a land ownership, and the land generally was owned by the king, who would give it out to be tendered or to be held by the nobles and other people who were resident on the land just in trust. That's basically the idea behind feudalism. And if you look at England and France, they still practice this mode of production. Now, what are the features of feudalism? One is holding of land, and so the nobles or the vassals, they held this land in trust for the king, who actually owns the land. And you would find out that there is a bond between the king and the nobles and the vassals. There is a relationship between them wherein they coexist and they live together on the land. Sovereignty, of course, the king is the sovereign in a feudalistic community. The fief or the feud, that is the portion of land that the king gives out to the nobles for the military services. That's why we have feudalism. It is from the fief or feud, whichever you call it. So the land that he gives, those estates that he gives out for the military services rendered, that is the fief. Obligations of the vassals. The vassals were answerable to the nobles who actually were holding the land in trust for the king. And where a vassal dies, the land, and he doesn't have a child or an heir, the land actually reverts back to the king. And we have land ownership. I already mentioned that the land actually is owned by the king or the queen, and the people pay their annual tributes either in cash or in kind. In kind by the services that they render. They do work for the nobles, they work on their farmlands and render every kind of service for them in exchange for the tributes they are to pay. And of course, the nobles themselves offer protection to these people. That's actually what it is about feudalism. Next up, we're looking at capitalism. That's a very popular one, and it is an economic system where the means of production, exchange and distribution of services and goods, where they are in the hands of private persons. Now, you would understand that in capitalism, private individuals are on the go more than the government. So government's participation in a capitalist society is very low. It's not like the government are not participatory, but the people, the private individuals, they control the means of production, they control everything about the economy, but the government will just have a minimal influence over the economy. If you study USA, it is a typical example. And so in this economic system, the consumer have sovereignty. The people, they decide what to produce. They choose how, the means of production. What to produce lies in the hands of the consumers and the private persons. They own the means of production, and the market is very competitive because it is individualistic. So everyone wants to outrun the other, and it could bring about rivalry, you know. So people are very particular about what they are doing because they want to do better than their neighbors. And government participation in this economic system is very minimal, not because they are not there, but their influence is just of a minimal nature. Profit making is the main goal in this economic system. Everyone is out there to make his own profit. Everyone wants to make money for himself. And it actually allows people to specialize because you have like the means, you have everything it takes to improve on a particular thing. So it actually allows the people to specialize, and they source capital by themselves. There is no collectivity in this one. That's very simple about capitalism. Now, socialism. Socialism is just the direct opposite of capitalism. It is a social, it is a political and an economic system where the state now is the country, not like your local states of Abia State and Enugu State. All right, so it is the system of economic system where the state owns and controls the means of production, exchange and distribution of goods and services, unlike the capitalism where it is in the hands of private individuals. And the main aim of socialism is to ensure that there is an equal distribution of the nation's wealth, so one person does not pack up the wealth of the nation into his pocket. And so this theory originated as a protest from the evils of capitalism. A lot of exploitation, the gap between the poor and the rich kept widening up, so much mishaps, people were not allowed access to means of production. If you were not fit and strong, you would not have access to anything. And so there was so much evils about capitalism that led to the rise of socialism. And you would know that Karl Marx introduced this system, and Russia actually is the very first country to embrace this system economically. Now, what are the features? I already said that the means of production are in the hands of the state, and the nation's wealth is shared accordingly. So everyone has an equal share, not like one person against the whole nation. It creates employment opportunities because government actually is in possession of the means of production, what to produce, how to produce. So it actually creates room for employment, and there is free education, free medical services. In this economic system, there is only one political party. That's very interesting. There's uniformity in price, so everyone is selling at government rate. there is no competition, there is no private enterprise. Production is just for the needs of the people, and no one is wasteful because the government actually gives it all out. So these are the features of capitalism, of socialism rather. Now we will be looking at fascism. Fascism is a form of government which is headed by a dictator. Now, the government has control over all the activities in the state, and personal liberties are denied to the people. That's actually what fascism is. It is headed by a dictator. So when you hear fascism, what comes to mind is dictatorship. I've said so many things about these other forms, but when you hear fascism, what just comes to mind is dictatorship, where personal rights and liberties are denied the people. And if you look at Italy under the administration of Benito Mussolini, it is a very typical example of fascism. Now, what are the features of fascism? Supremacy of the leader. He is the one person that everyone pays respect to, but pays no respect to anyone else. So he is supreme, he is lord of all. Autocratic tendency. Yes, he becomes an autocrat. Everyone lies to the whims and caprices of this person. He doesn't listen to anyone. He doesn't pay attention to the needs of the people. He is the all and lord of the people. And there is limited political participation in this system. Not many persons are involved because it's just one leader who is supreme, and so people are not allowed political participation. And there is repression of political opposition. There is no other political party, no political opposition, no constructive criticism from anywhere. It is just him who decides what and how it happens. And of course, superiority of the state, the use of propaganda, because the media and every other means of communication is actually under him and in his control. He could use propaganda to push out false information, how that everything is working well, whereas it is not. And then we have something called imperialistic tendency. That's the tendency to actually win over or even encroach into the lands and the boundaries of nations surrounding the country. And so it gets so bad that he's autocratic enough to even outstep the country where he is actually the leader into other boundaries, other territories, to also take possession of their lands. And he refuses to submit to international conventions. He is not compliant with anything international. He is lord and all. And of course, in this system, there is centralized economy. Now we are going to look at communism, seemingly as the last one. Now, communism is a political and economic system where the communities, through the common ownership, collectively controls all the means of production, goods and services, exchange and distribution. Now that sounds like communalism, but it's not. The slogan in this one is from each according to his ability to each according to his need. So everyone, we pull it all together and we give you just what you need. So everyone works according to his ability and we all pull it all together. And if you have so much more than you need, the ones you do not need are taken from you to give to those who would need them. Just look at North Korea and China. They are believed to be communist states. And what are the features of this system? Common ownership, the use of force, because you have more than enough. We would have to take the ones you don't need, the surplusage that you have. The government takes it, and that's by force. You give up what you don't need and only use or take the portion that you need. And again, in this system, it's a one-party system, and there are tendencies of dictatorship. So everyone just has to obey. It's not a voluntary act. It is by force. I'm sure you're beginning to see the difference between communism and communalism. And of course, we have a centralized economy. It's a classless society, and there is a common purpose. The wealth of the nation is evenly distributed, and there is control of means of production by the state. They decide how it runs and how it goes. And there is confiscation of property. If you have too much, they're going to confiscate it and take it away from you. And in this system, we also have universal public education. Now, having discussed these 6 forms of government or economic system, I'm sure you can see the differences between like capitalism and socialism, wherein one is in the hands of the state and the other in the hands of individuals. That is a close distinction, and if you look at all of them, they could have seemingly related features, but they have distinctions. And then I would like to really point out the relationship between socialism and communism, because they too look like they have a lot of semblance. Now, communism is the highest form of socialism. Always remember that. Now, while socialism advocates for state control of the means of production, communism demands a collective ownership of the means of production and distribution. That's a striking difference. And of course, both of them operate a one-party system, and in both systems, the political powers are highly centralized. Now, that's like a common ground between them. I am sure you're going to be looking at these forms, and you will be able to side by side place them and know which one is for and against its feature. And you find out the advantages and disadvantages of this system. No one is exactly very good and no one is exactly very bad. So whichever one any country chooses to accept is very acceptable and welcoming. We've come to the end of this session, and I'm sure you've had a good time understanding the forms of government and the ideologies behind them. I'm very sure you're going to be looking forward to so many of our videos which are coming up, where we'll be dealing with other issues of government. Do have a good time.